down to the logic of global crisis and limiting their population. Where do we preach population control? Bangladesh, Pakistan. Why? Because that doesn't cause us any inconvenience. If we would appeal to the women of the high-tech industrial democracies, and do more than appeal to them, offer them incentives, cancel income tax, cradle to the grave medical care,
free links to the World Wide Web.
Free links to the World Wide Web. But we can't just beat our breasts over the population issue. We have to recognize that it is related to resource extraction, and it is a problem driven by the consuming policies of the high-tech industrial democracies.
The call for our gathering, the announcement, part of the con which brought you here, mentioned the edge of the millennium, at the edge of the millennium. And so far, the millennium has been present by subtle implication alone. So I think to honor our commitment, we'll now trialogue on the edge of the millennium. Is okay?
It's okay.
Now, in our just appeared new book, The Evolutionary Mind, there is a chapter near the end called, I forget what it's called, it's about utopianism and millenarianism. Two pretty long isms which altogether add up to an overdose of different approaches to the future which are more or less classical, and there we spoke extensively of the extant literature and literary tradition and industry of utopian and millenarian genre. So that kind of utopian and millenarian stuff is not what we're going to talk about in this trialogue. I want to introduce a completely different notion of the millennium, and I'm interested more particularly in the edge of the millennium. And here's how it goes. This is partly, according to me, a mathematical view of history that brings up this particular version of the idea of the millennium. And nevertheless, other people have written a similar view of history without any explicit recourse to mathematics, so I think it's pretty general. It has to do, this view of history, with the approach we've taken toward biological evolution, that it goes forward in catastrophes and critical leaps and so on, sudden jumps. The punctuated equilibrium approach to history says that history goes along in a kind of a level plateau, developmentally speaking, although there may be a gradual development up or down overall. And then every once in a while there is a big leap. The first such view of history, I think, that we know about was presented by the ancient Egyptians. So this is nothing new. Now, in my own work, I have classified some major plateaus, including the last one, the one that we're at the end of now, according to my system of history, began 6,000 years ago or 5,500 years ago with the invention of the wheel and the first city-states and stuff like that, talking Sumer, talking Babylonia, talking ancient Egypt here. And so that's a 6,000-year plateau. Now, other people, for example, Bill Thompson, somebody we know and talk to about world cultural history, he has a similar scheme in which the plateau now ending is only 300 or 400 years old. See, there were people who really wrote about this explosion idea in world cultural history was Jakob Burckhardt. Burkhardt said the Renaissance was a quantum leap in world cultural history, and then other people said, well, what about Giotto? What about Petaccio? What about Boccaccio? And the truth is that whenever you look at two major milestones in history and consider that between the milestones to be a sort of a level road, then somebody will come along and find a smaller milestone in there. Nowadays we have fractal geometry, so we think that this is natural. Between any two big catastrophes there'll be 10 smaller ones. Between any two of the smaller ones there'll be 40 or 50 little teenier ones, and so on. The first person I know who put forward such a fractal idea of history, that it's not continuous, it's discontinuous, but the discontinuities are more or less dense, as in a fractal, the first such person is you, Terence. I give you credit in writing in my entry in the Encyclopedia of Time. You maybe have never read that book.
Never read it.
Well, there you'll find your name mentioned in a flattering way by me of all people.
Immortality at last.
At last. Well, to make a long story short, it's these controversial plateaus of history that I'm going to call millennia. And then if you want to go back to chapter 10 of the Evolutionary Mind and to read there about the history of the millenarial concept, then you'll see that the first one, wherein the number 1000 was actually mentioned for the length of one of these plateaus, it gave his name to the thing. It was a special case of my more abstract idea of millennium. It's the plateau of history. And what I mean by the edge of millennium is those times when there's the snap-out from one equilibrium to another. Cro-Magnon comes out of Neanderthalis or whatever it is, and oxygen comes out of the archaeobiological background and whatever. And the interest of this, according to me, is why are we here? Who would talk about the evolutionary mind? Who cares about the good and evil and the evolution of species and so on? This must be interesting only to the degree to which it informs us in this very present moment regarding our choices that we will make in the creation of the future. So according to chaos theory and its partner theory of bifurcations, this is one of the main things it teaches, something like the butterfly effect that you've heard about. In a dynamical system, or a massively complex dynamical system such as we live in, when there is a moment of bifurcation, which is the technical math jargon for these snaps, that is the only time you get to do anything about the evolution of the system. So according to this self-inflating view, we live at a especially important special moment in history where when we think something or do something, it has actually an enormous effect on the future. Maybe not a direct determinative effect, but we can't really say what the outcome will be. But what we do has some influence on the creation of the future more than other times in history. And the bigger the jump, the bigger the leverage, where Archimedes said, give me a lever and I'll move the world. We have a lever now, and we care about what's coming next. So that's why the edge of the millennium, any edge of any of the millennia, is particularly important to those revolutionary souls who want to make a change in things. It's a special time. A century or 2 centuries ago, you could struggle for the creation of a chaos revolution, and it would be impossible because there were no computers around, or there were no movie makers in Hollywood or something. I don't know. It takes more than we know about to create these special opportunities. And anyway, that's what I mean by millennium, and that's what I mean by at the edge of the millennium. And now this is only a hypothesis for the sake of discussion, but I kind of think that this is very credible, that we are now at the edge of a millennium. Therefore, we have to discuss this. And the question that I'm going to pose to you, Rupert, if this isn't too radical, is to what degree do you think actually that what we are doing now matters in the creation of the future? And if there is any possibility that what we do matters in the creation of the future, what kind of future or what kind of change are we trying to create? And to what degree what we are actually doing, for example, what we are talking about today, what we are doing today, to what degree could that possibly be a real effect, a real benefit in creating the future that we want to create, in contrast to other things that we might do, like go to the beach and pray or whatever. And particularly, should I stop here?
Well, that's I'm not sure.
Yes, well, I'm trying to make this easier for you because I think this might be too difficult.
Well, I mean, I think I said this morning, or maybe I didn't, but I believe it and have said it many times, salvation is an act of cognitive apprehension. So we do matter, because to the degree that we are ignorant, avidya in the Buddhist lexicon, we retard universal progress towards some kind of enlightenment.
But the doctrine of avidya, this is standing for all time since 1800 BC. Do you agree that this is a special moment?
Yes, I think so. Not only a special moment, but the other thing I would call people's attention to is the fact that no matter whether you scammed your way in here today, and no matter whether you're going to go back to an appliance box that you live in under a bridge, the odds are that you are very close to the top of the pyramid of global empowerment. You are mostly white, mostly well-educated, mostly have enough disposable income to come to an event like this. It's worth pointing out that all that rides on the backs of those who do not have such privilege. And so, yeah, this is a moment of enormous opportunity, and those who find themselves in this moment with power, defined however you care to define it, have a moral obligation to act. And I don't advocate a certain political agenda, not that we must become Marxists or that we must become anything. What we must become is clear. We have the technologies and the informational structures and all the necessary abilities to create paradise on earth, to lift up the least among us to at least an acceptable level of comfort and freedom. Why do we not do that? Because what stands in our way is our own minds, our own habits. We must change our minds. That's the most powerful political work people in this room could do. And there is nobody who is so enlightened that they don't need to work on themselves and do this. To the degree that we can change our minds, we will escape extinction, marginality, and so forth and so on. And to the degree that we cannot change our minds, we will prolong the agony, perhaps unto death and extinction, perhaps only making the struggle more difficult. But yes, this is a moment of enormous opportunity.
We have a yes.
A yes.
So you agree that it's a moment of special opportunity over the long and short scales of time, according to either mathematics or novelty theory?
Yes.
And you agree that we have a responsibility to do our best?
Yes.
And what you have to tell us is that if the 200 of us here change our minds, that would somehow have an ameliorative effect on the rest of the world and our creation of the future.
Yes.
How?
How would it have this effect?
Yes, by telepathic means, by the romance of photons,